Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the world. My name is Zach Jones, although a lot of you probably already know who I am by now, but welcome back to my channel. But if you're new to my channel, then welcome. As I said last night, I'm going to be reshooting a few PowerPoint presentations, because I know I have tried to reshoot them, but they've not really gone according to plan. But enough about that. I'm going to start this time. I'm reshooting 10 animals of the polar regions. By that I mean like North and South Poles. Now, I'm going to start with the legend that is the polar bear. Now, polar bears are the largest land carnivores in the world. Of course, this animal quite often vies with the grizzly bear for the title of the largest land predator. But when you think about it, grizzly bears for much of the year aren't even that carnivorous. Most of what they eat throughout the year is roots, berries and moss. The polar bears are purely carnivorous. They're the only bear in the world that I know of that is purely carnivorous. When I say they are the largest land predator, I mean fully grown male could be about 1.5 meters high at the shoulder, could be over 3 meters in length, and can stand 13 feet tall, has paws as big as dustbin lids, they can weigh as much as a small car, they have canine teeth that are about the length of my thumb, and they have an immensely powerful bite force, probably the strongest bite of any bear, at just over 1,000 pounds per square inch, so certainly powerful enough to bite through flesh, blubber and bone. But also, another thing about polar bears is their fur. It's not actually white, it's actually reflective, because it reflects the rays of the sun, and that gives them their almost white colour. And another thing about polar bears is their incredible sense of smell, because polar bears have been observed going in a dead straight line for over 20 kilometres towards the carcass of a whale or a seal that they wouldn't be able to see, but they would have smelt it from there. And they can smell their prey, like a seal or a whale, or the carcass of an animal from over 20 miles away. I mean, they probably don't have that much better sense of smell than their close cousins, the brown bears, but in the Arctic, where there's very little pollution, very little mingled smells, they have a phenomenal sense of smell that's 10,000 times more potent than a human being's. Of course, polar bears, as I said, are the only purely carnivorous bear. Of course, their main prey is seals, like ringed and bearded seals, but they will also take birds' eggs, young birds, and even walruses, and even things as big as beluga whales. I actually can't think of a single animal that has a greater range in prey size than polar bears. I mean, they'll take anything from a bird's egg up to a whale. And of course, they have many ways of hunting. In fact, probably their best method of hunting is to hang around a hole in the ice that is a breathing hole for seals or whales, because they have to come up to the surface to breathe, and the polar bear knows that, so quite often it will sit right at the breathing hole, and if a seal comes up to breathe, boom! There's one single swipe of its paw should kill a seal, or it will grab it by the head and it can crush its prey's skull with one single bite. And they can even pull a fully grown beluga whale out of the water, which is absolutely phenomenal. Of course, a beluga whale could be bigger and more heavier than a polar bear, but even so, they have the strength to pull an animal that big out of the water. Of course, probably the most dangerous prey polar bears will attack is this walrus. Walruses are some of the largest seals on the planet. In fact, a fully grown male can weigh about 4 tons, have tusks that can be as long as my leg, and also thick hide. And it's only when polar bears are incredibly hungry that they will try to attack walruses. Of course, polar bears are also one of the very few animals on the planet that see us human beings as food. Of course, in the Arctic, like in Svalbard, many of the polar bears in that part of the world have never seen a human being before. And polar bears are one of the very few animals that will, on occasion, target, hunt, and even kill a human being. I mean, it's desperately rare, but you've always got to have that in the back of your mind. But you've always got to have that in the back of your mind, because they are potentially very dangerous animals. But also, polar bears, because they spend much of their lives in and around the sea, well, the frozen sea, they are classed as a marine mammal like seals, whales and dolphins. In fact, their Latin scientific name literally means the sea bear. Of course, when the sea ice melts in the summer, polar bears quite often have to swim for miles and miles in freezing cold seas that can kill a human being in minutes. And that's another way they hunt seals, because as you can probably see right here, polar bears will quite often sneak up on seals that are resting on ice floes. And how they do that is by going right behind the seal, and of course the seals always stay close to the water's edge in case of a polar bear attacks. But they just leap out of the water and catch the seal by surprise. And of course, when a polar bear tackles a seal, a walrus or a whale, the main bit it goes for is blubber. Now, blubber is a thick layer of fat underneath the surface of the skin of a seal or a whale that can be 10 inches thick, and that keeps them insulated. But that's what the polar bears will go for first. And you might think of that as being unhealthy, but actually blubber has an enormous amount of calories in it. In fact, a seal like that, its blubber alone could contain over 100,000 calories. So it's really rich energy stuff, and that could sustain a polar bear for a week. And of course, unfortunately, polar bears are now considered a vulnerable species because they are classed as vulnerable because of climate change, which means that the summer is melting the sea ice earlier, so it's leaving less and less platforms for polar bears to hunt seals, and of course quite often they have to swim for miles and miles, and of course that pushes them to the brink of starvation, where they will go for walruses or even occasionally people. And of course, also another thing about polar bears with how they hunt is quite often if they can smell a seal underneath the ice, which is hiding in an ice cave, what they will do is they will stand on their hind legs and punch right through thick ice and snow to grab a seal in an ice cave. And of course, so while attacks on people are desperately rare, but if you ever do get too close to a polar bear, or quite often a polar bear comes closer to you, you quite often have to use flares called bear bangers, and that is usually enough to drive the bears away. But if it gets so close that you see the whites of its teeth, you have to use pepper spray. You spray a bear with pepper spray in the nose, it will immediately leave you alone. I mean, that's only as a last resort, but even so, polar bears, if there's bear bangers or guns being fired off, they're less likely to come any closer to you. And that only happens if the polar bear is incredibly hungry. While they may look very cute and cuddly, if you tried to give one a hug, you'd probably end up getting a nasty surprise because life is tough in the Arctic, food is scarce, and anything that moves is a potential meal, and that would include me. But yeah, these animals are the Arctic's top predators and continue to this day to be the true kings of the North. Of course, here is the Arctic Circle, which is where they're mostly found. Because one of the best places to see polar bears in the wild is here, Svalbard in the high Arctic. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you all is one of the most brutal hunters of Antarctica. It's an animal that will literally thrash a penguin out of its own skin. It is the terrifying leopard seal. Leopard seals are probably the largest predatory seal. That a fully grown male or female can grow to be 3 meters long, weigh up to half a ton, and could have canine teeth as long as my index finger. And they're the only seal to feed regularly on warm-blooded prey. Because a lot of their diet mainly consists of krill, which are a shrimp-like crustacean. But they will also take fish, but their favourite food of all is penguins and even other seals. Of course, I've always found something very sinister about the leopard seal. I mean, it does look almost reptilian, snake-like when you see it up close. But of course, it's not just called a leopard seal because it's spotted like a leopard, but also its method of hunting is very leopard-like. And of course, the dark colouring on the back helps the seal blend in with the dark depths of the ocean, but the lighter colouring on the underbelly means that if it attacks from above, then it blends in with the sun coming down through the water. That kind of camouflage is called counter shading. But how a leopard seal hunts is it will patrol the ice floes of Antarctica, and its main trick is to hide under ice floes and wait to grab penguins. Now, penguins may look very comical on the land, but once they get into the water, they're fast, they're agile, and very difficult to catch. So what the leopard seal does, it will hide in between the shallows of the sea and the open ocean. And of course, the penguins are vulnerable in between those, because once they get into the water, they have to rush out to open sea, because once they reach open water, they're safe. But the leopard seal will ambush them, it will grab a hold of a penguin, and of course, the main thing it's after is the thick layer of fat beneath the surface of the skin that keeps them insulated. But that is also their downfall, as that's the calories that the leopard seal is looking for. And of course, leopard seals aren't always successful in catching penguins, but scientists have actually studied them, because leopard seals have occasionally been seen hanging around the outskirts of penguin colonies, and they've taken as many as 8 penguins a day. And of course, as I haven't mentioned as well, leopard seals are usually solitary, but with the exceptions of a mother and a pup, and she will usually look after them for about 2 years until they're old enough to fend for themselves. You can go diving with leopard seals, but it's always very important that you observe the seal to know its personality and body language, and you don't thrash around. You try and you stay calm, because if you panic and act like a prey animal, or if it thinks you're a threat, then it might attack. I mean, that is desperately rare, but you've always got to have that in the back of your mind, as this is a very potentially dangerous animal. Of course, leopard seals may seem invincible, but they are not